My name is Oliver, and I thought I was about to marry the love of my life, Ruby. We had been together for 3 years, and every moment felt like it was leading us toward something permanent, something real. She was brilliant, funny, and had this way of making even the mundane feel magical. When I proposed to her on a rainy Tuesday evening in our favorite little restaurant, she said yes before I could even finish the question. We were both crying and laughing at the same time, and in that moment, I was certain I had found my forever. The months that followed were a whirlwind of wedding planning, choosing venues, tasting cakes, debating color schemes. Ruby wanted everything to be perfect, and I loved seeing her so excited about our future together. But as the big day approached, we both started feeling the weight of it all. The stress, the expectations, the endless decisions. That's when Ruby suggested we take a trip to the seaside before our wedding, a last getaway before settling down. "Just you and me," she said, running her fingers through my hair one evening as we sat on our worn-out couch. No wedding talk, no stress. Just us, the ocean, and some time to breathe before everything changes. It sounded perfect. We booked a charming little coastal town about 4 hours away, the kind of place with white-painted cottages, narrow cobblestone streets, and endless stretches of golden sand. The reviews promised quiet beaches, fresh seafood, and stunning sunsets. It seemed like exactly what we needed. When we arrived, the weather was perfect, the ocean calm, and for a while, everything felt right. Our rental cottage was quaint and cozy, with blue shutters and a small garden filled with wildflowers. We spent our first day exploring the town, holding hands as we wandered through local shops and stopped at a cafe for iced coffee. That evening, we sat on the beach watching the sun melt into the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "This is perfect," Ruby whispered, leaning her head on my shoulder. "I'm so glad we came." I kissed the top of her head and silently agreed. In that moment, surrounded by the sound of gentle waves and the warmth of the woman I loved, I felt completely at peace. I had no idea that within days, everything would begin to unravel. A few days in, we met another couple, Stephen and Nancy. It happened naturally enough, the way these things often do on vacation. We were at a beachside bar one evening, sitting at a small wooden table with our feet buried in the sand, when they approached us. Stephen was tall and confident, with an easy smile and the kind of charm that seemed effortless. Nancy was beautiful in a carefully composed way, designer sunglasses, perfectly styled hair, a laugh that sounded practiced. "Mind if we join you?" Stephen asked, already pulling out a chair. "We're new in town and figured we'd make some friends rather than drink alone." Ruby smiled warmly and gestured to the empty seats. "Of course. The more the merrier." They were friendly, funny, and we quickly started spending almost every day together. Beach walks, dinners, drinks at sunset. Stephen seemed to know all the best spots in town, the hidden restaurants where locals ate, the secluded coves where the water was clearest. Nancy was always agreeable, going along with whatever Stephen suggested, though I noticed she often seemed more interested in her phone than in the conversation. I thought we'd made new friends. Ruby certainly seemed to think so. She laughed at Stephen's jokes, engaged enthusiastically in conversations about travel and restaurants, and even suggested we all exchange numbers so we could stay in touch after the vacation. But looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. The way Stephen's attention always seemed to drift back to Ruby, even when Nancy was speaking. The way he found excuses to sit next to her rather than his own girlfriend. The way Ruby's cheeks would flush slightly when he complimented her dress or her laugh. At the time, I told myself it was just friendly banter, the harmless flirtation that sometimes happens in social settings. I trusted Ruby completely, and I didn't want to be the jealous, insecure boyfriend who ruined a good time. That trust, I would soon learn, was my biggest mistake. But then I started noticing things. Small things at first. The kind that you can almost convince yourself don't mean anything, but that leave an uncomfortable feeling in your gut nonetheless. One afternoon, I came back from a swim and saw Stephen rubbing sunscreen on Ruby's back. The image is burned into my memory now. Ruby lying face down on her beach towel, her bikini top untied, and Stephen kneeling beside her, his hands moving slowly across her skin. It wasn't just casual. His hands lingered a little too long, his fingers tracing the curve of her spine with what seemed like deliberate slowness. Nancy was nearby, absorbed in her book, seemingly oblivious or unconcerned. Ruby's eyes were closed, a small smile playing on her lips. I stood there for a moment, water dripping from my swim trunks onto the hot sand, feeling something cold settle in my chest despite the warm sun. When Stephen finally noticed me, he looked up with that same easy smile and said, "Hey man," just helping Ruby out. She couldn't reach her back. Ruby opened her eyes and glanced at me, then casually retied her bikini top and sat up. "Thanks, Stephen," she said brightly, as if nothing unusual had happened. I waited until we were back at the cottage that evening to say something. I tried to keep my voice calm and reasonable as I brought it up. "Ruby, I felt a bit uncomfortable today. With Stephen and the sunscreen thing." She was brushing her hair in front of the bathroom mirror, and I saw her roll her eyes in the reflection before she even turned around. When she did face me, her expression was a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. "Stop being so jealous, Oliver. It's embarrassing." The word embarrassing hit me like a slap. Not hurtful, not concerning, embarrassing, as if my feelings were something to be ashamed of, something childish and unreasonable. "I'm not being jealous," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just think it was a bit intimate. He could have asked me to help you, or you could have asked me." She sighed dramatically and turned back to the mirror. "He was just being helpful. You're making a big deal out of nothing. This is why I didn't want to tell you. I knew you'd overreact." "Wait, what do you mean you didn't want to tell me? Has this happened before?" "Oh my God, Oliver. Listen to yourself. We're on vacation with new friends, and you're interrogating me like I've committed some crime. Can we please just enjoy our trip without you turning into some paranoid, controlling boyfriend?" That stung. It stung badly. Ruby had always been good with words, and she knew exactly how to make me doubt myself. Was I being paranoid? Was I overreacting? Maybe I was just stressed about the wedding and projecting my anxieties onto innocent situations. Sleep didn't come easily that night, and when it did, it was filled with uneasy dreams. The next few days of our vacation passed in a strange haze of forced normalcy. We continued spending time with Stephen and Nancy, though I found myself watching their interactions with Ruby more carefully now. I noticed how Stephen would find reasons to touch her, a hand on her shoulder when he was telling a story, guiding her by the small of her back through a crowded restaurant, his leg pressed against hers under the table during dinner. Each time, Ruby seemed to lean into these touches rather than pull away. I also noticed how Nancy seemed increasingly disengaged from Stephen. She would drift away during our group outings, taking phone calls or sitting apart from us scrolling through social media. When Stephen paid attention to Ruby, Nancy rarely seemed to care or even notice. At the time, I thought perhaps they were just a couple comfortable enough not to be jealous, or maybe they were having their own relationship problems. The truth, I would later discover, was far more cynical. One evening, the four of us went to a fancy seafood restaurant Stephen had recommended. Stephen kept refilling Ruby's wine glass, encouraging her to try different dishes from his plate, complimenting her dress and her laugh, and the way her eyes sparkled in the candlelight. I sat there, forcing smiles, feeling increasingly like an outsider at my own vacation. "You're a lucky man, Oliver," Stephen said at one point, raising his glass toward me but keeping his eyes on Ruby. "Ruby is something special." "I know," I replied quietly, though the words felt hollow in my mouth. After dinner, we walked along the beach. Stephen and Ruby had fallen into step ahead of Nancy and me, their voices carrying back on the ocean breeze, their laughter a little too intimate. Nancy walked beside me in silence, her heels in her hand, seemingly lost in her own thoughts. The vacation ended a few days later. As we packed our bags and said goodbye to the cottage with its blue shutters and wildflower garden, I felt a confusing mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the strange dynamic with Stephen and Nancy would be left behind at the beach. Sadness that what should have been a perfect romantic getaway had been tainted by suspicion and doubt. On the drive home, Ruby was quieter than usual, staring out the window at the passing scenery. When I asked if she was okay, she smiled and squeezed my hand. "Just sad the vacation is over," she said, "but excited to get back to wedding planning." I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. When we got home, I thought that was it, just a strange holiday memory, something we would laugh about years later when we told the story of our pre-wedding trip. "Remember when I got weirdly jealous of that guy Stephen?" I would say, and Ruby would roll her eyes affectionately and remind me how silly I had been. That's what I thought would happen. I was so very wrong. But soon after we got home, Stephen came back to town. This shouldn't have been surprising. Ruby had mentioned during our vacation that Stephen lived in the same city as us, just in a different neighborhood. What I hadn't expected was how immediately and thoroughly he would insert himself into our lives. The first time he showed up at our apartment, it was supposedly spontaneous. Ruby and I were having a quiet evening at home, still catching up on laundry and emails from our time away, when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Stephen standing there with a bottle of expensive wine and that same charming smile. "Surprise," he said, brushing past me into the apartment as if he'd been invited. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to see the happy couple. Hope you don't mind." I did mind, actually, but before I could say anything, Ruby appeared from the bedroom, her face lighting up in a way that made my stomach clench. "Stephen, what a nice surprise. Come in, come in." And somehow he was always around. It started with that one unexpected visit, but soon it became a regular occurrence. He'd show up on Friday evenings with wine, suggesting we all go out to dinner. He'd text Ruby, they had exchanged numbers during the vacation, along with Nancy and me, supposedly so the four of us could stay in touch, asking if she wanted to grab coffee or check out a new gallery downtown. He'd invite himself to our apartment, bring wine, sit too close to Ruby on our couch, compliment her dress, all right in front of me. The compliments were particularly grating. Not because compliments themselves are wrong, but because of how he delivered them, with his eyes lingering on her in a way that felt inappropriate, with words that seemed carefully chosen to be just ambiguous enough that objecting to them would make me seem unreasonable. "That color really brings out your eyes, Ruby. You look particularly beautiful today. Oliver is such a lucky man. I love how you laugh. It's so genuine and unself-conscious." Each compliment felt like a small invasion, a boundary being tested and crossed. And each time, Ruby would smile and thank him, seemingly oblivious to, or willfully ignoring, the undertones. I told Ruby that his behavior was disrespectful. I tried to be calm and rational about it, explaining that his constant presence in our home and his overly familiar behavior with her made me uncomfortable. I suggested we needed boundaries, that perhaps we should take a step back from this new friendship before the wedding. But she laughed it off, waving her hand dismissively, as if I were being ridiculous. "You're acting paranoid again, Oliver. Stephen is just being friendly. He's an outgoing person. That's just how he is. But why does he need to be here so often? Why does he need to touch you so much? Why?" "Oh my God, stop it," she snapped, her earlier playfulness evaporating into irritation. "You're being controlling and jealous, and I'm getting really tired of it. Stephen is our friend. Our friend. Not just mine. If you can't handle me having male friends, maybe we need to talk about bigger issues." The way she turned it around on me, making my legitimate concerns seem like character flaws, left me feeling confused and guilty. Was I being controlling? Was I letting my insecurities poison a normal friendship? Ruby had male friends before, colleagues, old schoolmates, and I'd never had a problem with any of them. Why was Stephen different? Deep down I knew why. But acknowledging that truth meant facing the possibility that the woman I was about to marry was betraying me. And that was a reality I wasn't ready to accept. Meanwhile, Stephen's presence in our lives continued to expand. He knew our schedule, our favorite restaurants, our weekend routines. He would text Ruby throughout the day. I know because sometimes her phone would buzz while she was in the shower or cooking, and I would see his name light up the screen. When I asked about it, she'd say they were just chatting about normal things, sharing funny articles or memes, nothing important. Even Nancy didn't seem to care that her boyfriend was spending so much time with my fiancé. On the rare occasions when she joined Stephen's visits to our apartment, she seemed detached and disinterested, sipping wine while scrolling through her phone, barely participating in the conversation. I found her behavior almost as strange as Stephen's. What kind of girlfriend doesn't care that her boyfriend is constantly fawning over another woman? Later I learned why. She was only dating Stephen for his money, and didn't mind what he did behind her back. To Nancy, Stephen was a means to an end, a source of expensive dinners and luxury vacations and designer handbags. As long as he continued funding her lifestyle, she was content to look the other way while he pursued his real interests elsewhere. It was a transactional relationship, cynical and hollow, and she had absolutely no incentive to interfere with whatever game Stephen was playing with Ruby. But I didn't know any of this at the time. All I knew was that something was deeply wrong in my relationship, but every time I tried to address it, I was made to feel like the problem. The truth came out in the most modern and humiliating way possible, through screenshots of text messages. It all came crashing down on a Tuesday evening in October, about 6 weeks before our wedding was scheduled to take place. Ruby was working late at her office, or at least that's what she had told me. I was at home, going through RSVPs and trying to finalize the seating chart for the reception, when my phone buzzed with a message from Roy, one of my oldest friends. Man, I need to talk to you. Can you call me? The tone was serious enough that I immediately dialed his number. Roy answered on the first ring, and I could hear the discomfort in his voice. Oliver, I don't know how to tell you this, and I'm really sorry to be the one who has to, but... He paused, and I could hear him taking a deep breath. I have some messages I think you need to see. Between Ruby and Steven. My heart dropped into my stomach. What are you talking about? My girlfriend Emma knows Nancy, Steven's girlfriend. They work at the same company. Apparently Nancy found messages on Steven's laptop and sent them to Emma, I guess as a kind of fuck you to Steven. Emma showed them to me, and, man, I think you need to see these. My hands were shaking as I opened the images Roy sent. The first few messages seemed innocent enough. Mundane conversations about meeting for coffee or recommendations for restaurants. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted dramatically. The messages were from throughout our beach vacation and the weeks that followed. Reading them felt like having my chest cavity opened while I was still conscious. From Ruby, I can't stop thinking about the beach, about your hands on my skin. From Steven, you were so beautiful that day. I wanted to do so much more than just rub sunscreen on your back. From Ruby, this is crazy. I'm engaged. I shouldn't be feeling this way. From Steven, but you do feel this way. We both do. What we have is special. Don't let some obligation to Oliver keep you from being happy. The messages went on and on. Plans to meet while I was at work. Complaints about me, how I was suffocating and paranoid and not spontaneous like you are. Explicit descriptions of what they wanted to do to each other, what they had done to each other. When a friend showed me messages between Ruby and Steven, texts that left no doubt. They had started their affair on that beach and continued it at my home. In my home. While I was there, sometimes in the next room, they had been planning and conducting their betrayal. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, reading and rereading the messages until the words blurred together. The apartment around me felt suddenly foreign, contaminated. How many times had Steven been here, sitting on this same couch where I was sitting now, while carrying on an affair with my fiancée? How many times had Ruby lied to my face, made me feel crazy for noticing what was right in front of me? The worst part, worse even than the betrayal itself, was realizing how thoroughly I had been manipulated. Every time I had expressed concern, Ruby had turned it around on me, making me doubt my own perceptions, making me feel like the problem. Gaslighting, I would later learn it was called. She had been so convincing, so skilled at making me question my own reality, that I had almost come to believe I was the one damaging our relationship with my unfounded jealousy. But it hadn't been unfounded. My instincts had been right all along. I just hadn't trusted them enough. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard Ruby's key in the door. When she walked in, she was smiling, humming to herself, completely unaware that her carefully constructed deception was about to collapse. Hey babe, sorry I'm so late. The meeting ran way over, and then I had to. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw my face. Oliver? What's wrong? I held up my phone, showing her the screenshots. I watched as her face went through a rapid progression of emotions. Confusion, recognition, fear, and finally defiance. Where did you get those? She demanded, her voice sharp. Not those aren't real, or I can explain, or I'm so sorry. Her first concern was how I had discovered her secret. Does it matter? I asked, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. Is any of it not true? She stood there, frozen, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for words. I could almost see her mind working, trying to figure out how to spin this, how to make this somehow my fault too. But there was no spin that could work this time. The evidence was too clear, too explicit, too damning. That night, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just packed her things, canceled the wedding, and told her to get out. The strange calmness that had settled over me after reading those messages persisted as I moved through our apartment, methodically gathering Ruby's belongings. Clothes from the closet, toiletries from the bathroom, books and photos, and all the small accumulated detritus of 3 years together. I packed it all into the suitcases we had used for our beach vacation, and the irony wasn't lost on me. Ruby stood in the living room, alternating between tears and anger, her emotions shifting rapidly as she realized I wasn't going to engage with her dramatic displays or her attempts to argue. Oliver, please, can we just talk about this? Don't I at least deserve a chance to explain? I paused in the doorway of the bedroom, my arms full of her sweaters. Explain what, exactly? Explain how you started fucking another man, while we were on what was supposed to be our pre-wedding vacation. Explain how you continued the affair in our home, sometimes while I was here. Explain how you gaslit me for weeks, making me feel crazy for noticing what was happening right in front of me. She flinched at the harshness of my words, but I felt nothing. The hurt would come later, I knew. Right now, I was operating on autopilot, on some protective instinct that let me function without fully feeling. It wasn't like that, she said weakly. Stephen and it just happened. I didn't plan it. And it didn't mean anything, not really. You're the one I was going to marry. You're the one I chose. You chose wrong, I said simply, zipping up the last suitcase. I called her a taxi while she stood there, mascara running down her cheeks. Part of me expected to feel something, sadness, anger, some kind of emotional release. But I just felt empty, hollowed out, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left only a shell. She tried to play the victim as the taxi pulled up outside. You're really going to throw away 3 years over this? Everyone makes mistakes, Oliver. If you loved me, you'd at least try to work through this. That's when something finally broke through my numbness, a flash of anger so pure and clean it almost felt refreshing. If I loved you, Ruby, I loved you so much I was about to legally bind myself to you for life. I loved you enough to ignore my own instincts because I didn't want to believe you were capable of this. I loved you enough to let you make me feel crazy for noticing your affair. But it was over the moment you fucked Stephen on that beach. You just didn't have the decency to tell me. I handed her the suitcases and opened the door. She stood there for a moment, perhaps waiting for me to change my mind, to break down, to give her one more chance. But it was over. Finally, she walked out, and I closed the door behind her. I turned the deadbolt, leaned my forehead against the cool wood, and took my first full breath in what felt like hours. The next few days were a blur of phone calls. Canceling the wedding venue, the caterer, the photographer, the florist. Each call required an explanation, and I developed a short, efficient script. The wedding has been called off. I apologize for any inconvenience, and am happy to pay any cancellation fees. Most vendors were sympathetic when I told them what had happened. Some even waived their fees, which was a small kindness that I appreciated more than they could know. Calling our families was harder. My mother cried. Ruby's parents were shocked, then angry, though I suspect their anger had more to do with the embarrassment of a canceled wedding than with their daughter's behavior. Friends took sides or tried to remain neutral, which was almost worse. Some suggested I was overreacting, that I should consider couples therapy, that everyone deserves a second chance. But I was done giving chances. I was done being made to feel paranoid and controlling for trusting my own eyes. I was done being the nice guy who gets walked all over. Roy, who had been the one to show me the messages, became my anchor during those difficult weeks. He helped me change the locks on the apartment, helped me pack up the rest of Ruby's belongings that she sent her sister to collect, and sat with me through the long evenings when the silence of the apartment became unbearable. You did the right thing, he told me one night as we sat on my couch drinking beer. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but you did. Now, when I look back at that trip, I realize it wasn't a vacation. It was a warning I ignored. Every instinct I had was telling me something was wrong, but I had been so conditioned to doubt myself, so determined to be the trusting, non-jealous partner, that I ignored what was right in front of me. I think about that afternoon on the beach often, Stephen's hands on Ruby's back, her closed eyes, that small smile. That was the moment I should have packed our bags and left. Not because of Stephen's actions, which were inappropriate but perhaps forgivable in isolation, but because of Ruby's reaction when I expressed my discomfort. The eye roll, the dismissiveness, the immediate turning of my legitimate concern into a character flaw of mine. That should have told me everything I needed to know about who she really was, and how little she respected me. I think about all the times I ignored my gut feelings because I didn't want to be that guy, the jealous, controlling boyfriend who doesn't trust his partner. But there's a difference between unhealthy jealousy and recognizing when boundaries are being violated. There's a difference between being controlling and having standards for how you deserve to be treated. I had confused the two, and it cost me months of my life and nearly led me to make the biggest mistake of my life. And I'll never ignore my gut again. That seaside vacation was supposed to be the beginning of my married life. Instead, it was the beginning of my real life, the life where I respect myself enough to walk away from people who don't respect me. And that, I've learned, is the most valuable lesson of all. Thank you for watching the video to the end. YouTube may no longer suggest my channel to you, so subscribe to it to receive new interesting stories. You will also help the channel grow and improve the quality of its content. A playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to is now displayed on the screen. You can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.